Great job, Bison Band. Well, good morning. I'm Keith White, the principal at Buffalo High School, and it is my privilege and honor to welcome you to our Veterans Day Assembly today. I want to personally thank all the veterans in attendance and all veterans in our nation's past and present who have served in the United States Army Armed Forces. Thank you for your sacrifice and dedication to ensure and protect my personal freedom and all here today. Veterans Day was started by U.S. President Woodrow Wilson in his first Armistice Day speech in 1919, 1 year after World War I officially ended 100 years ago, and officially adopted on June 4, 1926 by the United States Congress as a resolution for the President to issue an annual observance to be held every November 11th. The Buffalo High School and Prairie Middle School Student Council students and sponsors have planned an exciting and honoring ceremony for you today. Since Veterans Day is on a Monday this year, we want to make sure that we do this and honor you today. Please silence all cell phones at this time, and thank you for attending. And thank you in advance for your respect and etiquette as we help honor our veterans. Now, if everybody would stand, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Welcome Dr. Tim Ryan to the stage.
Good morning. As Keith said, I'm Tim Ryan, Superintendent of Schools here in Dallas County. On behalf of the R1 School Board, I would like to welcome all of you this morning, especially to honor our veterans who are here for the 100th commemoration of Armistice Day, now known as Veterans Day. I think it's important as we look around the room and we see our students here, that our students know who's sitting in front of them. Each year, I have the veterans stand as I announce the era in which you served our country. And we will start most recent, moving backwards. If you served between September 11th, 2001 and today or are currently serving, can you please either acknowledge by raising your hand or stand? If you served our country between 1980 and September 11th, please rise at this time. If you served between 1960 to 1980, the era also encompassing the Vietnam War, please rise. If you served between 1946 and 1960, please rise. Quite honestly, it always chokes me up to announce the last group. If you've served during World War II, please rise at this time. I personally thank each of you for your service. Thank you. It's my honor and privilege today to introduce our guest speaker, Senator Sandy Crawford. We are fortunate here in Dallas County that our state senator is actually a resident of Buffalo and a resident of Dallas County. And she serves us well. I know she's very attentive to the school district's needs, and hopefully she is to you as well. It's my deep honor and privilege to welcome Senator Sandy Crawford to the microphone.
Good morning, everyone. It's always good to be home. I want to make a special welcome to our veterans. Every time I'm asked to speak at a veterans event, you really don't know what to say. Words really don't convey what we want to. Thank you really doesn't seem like enough. But that's exactly what we're here today to do. To thank you for your service. Thank you for what you've done for the United States of America. It really is our privilege to honor you, our veterans. You made countless sacrifices to protect all of us, to protect our threats to our freedom and safety. Without your efforts, we would not be able to enjoy the freedoms we have as citizens of the greatest nation in the world. The price of freedom is high, and we must never forget those that are willing to pay for it, those like you. We'll never be able to fully repay our debt of gratitude to the hundreds of thousands of American service members who have died in battle, who were wounded, and who served. But we can pay tribute and say thank you to our veterans and to the more than 25 million veterans still living today, over 488,000 of those live in Missouri. There are Missouri veterans just like you. Every single time that Americans have been called to fight for what's right, men and women have stepped up. They've been ready to answer the call. They've been willing to sacrifice everything in order to protect this country from threats of terror. Many times I don't think we really understand that sacrifice unless it affects a family member or a friend, someone who we know who's deployed or serving. Right now, there are brave men and women dedicated to fighting for our freedom throughout the world. One of those soldiers is somebody I know, and probably many of you know someone who's serving right now too. Private Michael Grapes is from Lebanon. I happen to go to church with him. He's currently serving in Afghanistan, and I have to tell you, it's a pretty hot spot. That's a place where they get shot at. They're getting shot at today. And sometimes we kind of think we're not really at war, but when you know somebody who's over there right in the middle of it, you think about it a little bit differently. Michael is one of my heroes, as all of you are here today. Veterans are so important to the state and certainly for my senatorial district. We have Fort Leonard Wood right next door to the east. Whiteman Air Force Base is on the northern end of my district, just to the west of it. And both of these have significant impact on our state. You know, every single year we pass veteran-friendly legislation because we want our military to serve here, we want them to train here, to serve here, and we especially want them to stay here when they finish their military career. 101 years ago in 1918, on the 11th day in the 11th month, the world celebrated the end of World War I. The very next year, November 11th, 1919, was set aside as Armistice Day. Later, it was called Veterans Day. And it's a day set aside to remember the sacrifices of the men and women just like you who served our country. Veterans are and always will be an important part of our country's history and framework. And to the students that are here today, it is my hope that you will remember the men and women of our armed forces, our American veterans, and that you continue to remember that they proudly and selflessly served to make the world a better place and a safer place. Many times it seems like Veterans Day is just another holiday. No, it really isn't. Veterans Day represents something special. It really does. And I wanted to tell you a story because this really had a big impact on me. This past summer, I was privileged to go to Washington, D.C., and one of the highlights of the trip was when we visited the Vietnam Memorial Wall. And something really special happened that day, and it kind of chokes me up to think about it. I was with a group of students, actually, and so it was our day to visit all the memorials, and so we were at the Vietnam Memorial Wall, and there was a group of honor flight soldiers there. And so we were looking at the wall, and we noticed that one of the honor flight people, he was being pushed in a wheelchair, and his person rolled him up to the wall, and you could tell he was looking for somebody's name on that wall. And so he appeared to find it, but what happened next was truly, I don't even know how to describe it, divine intervention. A lady walked up to the wall beside him, and she was looking for a name as well. And lo and behold, she was looking for the very same name. There are 58,000 names on that wall, but two people at the very same time were looking at that wall to find the very same person's name. And so they began to talk because they had no idea who they were. They didn't know each other. Come to find out, they started talking, and it was the lady's uncle. And so she was there to pay tribute to her uncle. And the soldier that was in the wheelchair, he said, I was his platoon leader, and he died in my arms. You can call that chance or luck. I would call it divine intervention. But I think that story bears repeating. It gets to me every time I think about it. But out of all the millions of people around the world, And out of 58,000 names on that wall, to have two people being at that wall on the very same day, at the very same minute, now it was a miracle. And they were able to talk to each other and find out a little bit more about their soldier that they were coming to pay tribute to. But I will never forget that. And I guess I say that to make this point. People have died for our country, especially students. I know it's just another assembly probably for some of you, but people have given their lives for our freedom, and it's a big deal. And these men and women that are here before you today, they were willing to lay it all on the line for you. Just stop and think about that. They were willing to give their life for the freedom of this country because they loved their country. In closing, a lot of times I like to look at poems or look at songs, patriotic songs and things like that, because they sometimes can convey what I want to say better than I can say it. And so, Oh Beautiful for Spacious Skies, you know, that's a song that we all are familiar with. But I wonder if you're familiar with the third stanza that says this: Oh beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved. Let me say that one more time. For more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine. May God continue to bless each and every one of our veterans that are here today and those serving. May God continue to bless the great state of Missouri, and may God bless the United States of America.
Thank you so very much, Representative Crawford. We really appreciate it, and I could tell it was coming from the heart and how important that is. We here really do appreciate all the hard work you do for the community. Now, at this time, I would ask that Representative Crawford help present some medals that the state of Missouri sends out. Personnel to be decorated. Post. And you're going to This is a letter from the governor that each of these gentlemen has received. It is my honor and privilege on behalf of the people of Missouri to award you a medal, medallion, and certificate of recognition in honor of your service during Operation Iraqi Freedom, New Dawn, Desert Storm, and Desert Shield in Afghanistan and Iraq. The service of thousands of Americans alongside coalition forces during these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, you have guaranteed to your fellow Missourians and an entire nation of freedom-loving people. And you can rightly take pride in your service. My own experience serving our country in the United States Army installed in me numerous valuable characteristics I have used throughout my life. I will forever hold tremendous respect for every individual willing to join our armed forces in service to this great nation. I extend my deepest appreciation for their sacrifices and your sacrifices you made to protect the freedoms we cherish in America. Sincerely, Michael L. Parsons, Governor. The first medal goes to Gordon Black, and it is for Desert Storm. The second medal goes to Mr. Bo Hampton for Desert Storm. Stand by. Bo was a 22-year veteran of the Navy in the submarine service, and so he was also serving during Iraqi freedom. James Pyland, Iraqi freedom. Leroy Laudenbach, Iraqi freedom. Leroy's also very active in the community, being on the school board, Habitat for Humanity, and many other dear. I want you to know that veterans, when they come home, continue to serve their area. Once again, thank you very much, veterans, and thank you, Senator Crawford. Dismissed.
Good morning. I am Natalie Gilpin. I am Student Body Publicity Chair, and I'm going to discuss World War II. The brave soldiers who fought in World War II are not only honored on Veterans Day, but rather are honored and remembered every day. I was glad to hear I would be speaking about World War II because this is the war my grandpa fought in. Many people lost their lives or were injured for the sake of the American people during this war. A debated question, however, is the exact date the war began. Two dates often mentioned are July 7, 1937, the Marco Polo Bridge incident, and September 1, 1939, the day Germany invaded Poland, leading Britain and France to declare war on Hitler's Nazi state. Regardless of the day it began, the United States was officially drawn into the war after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, a day President Roosevelt said would live in infamy. After this attack, many American citizens heroically enlisted, and the entire country prepared itself for war. Through a united and determined effort, the United States was able to quickly and effectively join efforts with the Allies and began the stand for American values. On average, 27,000 people were killed each day between September 1, 1939 and September 2, 1945, the formal surrender of Japan. Technological advances had entered the world, bringing about the most destructive war in human history. The primary countries involved were the nations of Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan, and the allied nations of Great Britain, France, China, the Soviet Union, and the United States. 7 days after the death of Adolf Hitler, Germany surrendered. The Japanese would go on to fight for nearly 4 more months after their surrender, which was caused by the US dropping atomic bombs on the Japanese towns of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The world was forever changed by World War II. Around 60 million people were killed, the majority of them civilians. Over 16 million Americans served in World War II. The heroic men and women who served during the war will forever be remembered for their allegiance to their country. If you served during World War II, please stand now so we can honor your service and sacrifice. Thank you. Now please welcome Reagan Portman as she discusses the Korean War.
June 25, 1950, North Korean tanks crossed the 38th parallel, the demilitarized boundary between North and South Korea. In response to North Korea's invasion into South Korea, the United Nations convened to formulate a response. The UN demanded North Korea's immediate withdrawal, and when this was not met, United States Army General Douglas MacArthur was appointed Supreme Commander of the UN forces. 22 nations contributed to the UN forces, with the United States providing 88% of the UN's military personnel. The United States stepped up in a time when few countries around the world had the strength or will to stand up and fight for democracy. To halt the rapid progress of North Korean forces into South Korea, the United States deployed forces to the Korean front from Japan. Although the North Korean forces had an advantage, the United States forces quickly established themselves as an effective force. The first battle the Americans entered in the Korean War was the Battle of Osan. In September of 1950, the United States launched an amphibious counteroffensive at Incheon. This successful push allowed the US forces to cut off North Korean supply lines and capture a large group of their soldiers. With the entrance of China on the side of the North Koreans, the war quickly became a war of attrition in which both sides attempted to grind down the other. Although the fighting on the ground became a stalemate, air-to-air combat and bombings continued throughout the fighting. The end result of the war never declared a clear winner. However, the United States, North Korea, and South Korea were able to agree to an armistice on July 27, 1953, to end the bloodshed to restore peace and order to the Korean Peninsula. During this conflict, the United States lost over 33,000 service members and saw another 100,000 soldiers injured in combat. If you served during the Korean War, please stand now so we can honor your service and sacrifice. Thank you. Now please welcome Hannah Long as she reads about the Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War was a long, costly armed conflict that pitted the communist regime of North Vietnam and its southern allies, known as the Viet Cong, against South Vietnam and its principal ally, the United States. After World War II and the withdrawal of Japanese forces from Vietnam, political leader Ho Chi Minh, inspired by Chinese and Soviet communism, formed the Viet Minh to rise up and take control of the country. Ho and his supporters wanted a Vietnam with a nation modeled by other communist countries, while the French backed forces with many others wanting a Vietnam with a close economic and cultural tie to the West. Seeing an opportunity to seize control, Ho Chi Minh's forces rose up, taking over and declaring a Democratic Republic of Vietnam with Ho as president. Beginning of the spring of 1950, the United States began to financially and militarily assist the French forces in Vietnam. Over the next couple of years, the United States would slowly increase the amount of assistance given in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Their main goal was to stop the spread of oppressive communist governments across Asia. Active U.S. involvement began in 1954, with the U.S. troops sending equipment to help train the South Vietnamese forces, now under the control of President Diem. Inside South Vietnam, the Viet Cong, a group of Viet Minh sympathizers, began fighting back against the government with attacks on government officials and other high-profile targets. In 1959, they were openly engaging in firefights with the South Vietnamese army. In response, the United States began to increase its military presence and soon had over 9,000 troops in South Vietnam. This was only the beginning of the U.S. support to South Vietnam. President Lyndon B. Johnson further increased U.S. military and economic support, asking brave U.S. service members once again to put themselves at risk to protect those who could not protect themselves. With the beginning of Operation Rolling Thunder, Johnson increased the number of troops until we had over 175,000 service members in Vietnam by 1962. At its peak, the U.S. would have over 540,000 soldiers on the ground. Once President Nixon gained the presidency, he began a slow process of withdrawing U.S. troops and increasing aerial and arterial bombardment and training for the Southern Vietnamese Army. In January 1973, the U.S. and North Vietnam ended open hostilities, although fighting continued between North and South Vietnamese trained and equipped forces. The U.S. forces were no longer part of the fighting. In total, we lost 58,200 service members and another 300,000 were wounded fighting for their country. If you served during the Vietnam War, please stand now so we can honor your service and sacrifice. Thank you. Now please welcome Alexis Logan as she reads about the Persian Gulf War.
Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein ordered the invasion of neighboring Kuwait in early August 1990. Alarmed by these actions, fellow Arab powers such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt called on the United States and other Western nations to intervene. On November 29, 1990, the UN Security Council authorized the use of all necessary means of force against Iraq if it did not withdraw from Kuwait by the 15th of the following January. By then, the coalition forces that were prepared to face off against Iraq numbered some 750,000, including 540,000 U.S. personnel and smaller forces from Britain, France, Germany, the Soviet Union, Japan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Iraq had the support of Jordan, Algeria, the Sudan, Yemen, Tunisia, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. By mid-February, the coalition forces had shifted the focus of their air attacks toward Iraqi ground forces in Kuwait and southern Iraq. A massive Allied ground defensive, Operation Desert Sabre, was launched on February 24th, with the troops heading from northeastern Saudi Arabia into Kuwait and southern Iraq. Over the next 4 days, coalition forces encircled and defeated the Iraqis and liberated Kuwait. At the same time, U.S. forces stormed into Iraq some 120 miles west of Kuwait, attacking Iraq's armored reserves from the rear. The allied Iraqi Republican Guard mounted a defense in southeastern Iraq, but most were defeated by February 27th. After 42 days of attacks by the Allied coalition in the air and on the ground, U.S. President George H.W. Bush declared a ceasefire on February 28, 1991. By that time, most Iraqi forces in Kuwait had either surrendered or fled. Although the Gulf War was recognized as a decisive victory for the coalition, Kuwait and Iraq suffered enormous damage, and Saddam Hussein was not forced from power. Intended by coalition leaders to be a limited war fought at minimum cost, it would have lingering effects for years to come, both in the Persian Gulf region and around the world. In the years that followed, U.S. and British aircraft continued to patrol skies and mandate a no-fly zone over Iraq, while Iraqi authorities made every effort to frustrate the carrying out of the peace troops, especially United Nations weapons inspections. This resulted in a brief resumption of hostilities in 1998, after which Iraq steadfastly refused to admit weapons inspectors. In addition, Iraqi forces regularly exchanged fire with U.S. and British aircraft over the no-fly zone. If you served during the Persian Gulf War, please stand now so we can honor your service and sacrifice. Before we move on, I would personally like to say thank you. You guys are blessings to all of us. The students here today, including myself, only learn about war through history classes and the stories that are passed down to us. But you had to actually live it, and because of that, I want to say thank you. Now please welcome Michaela Strickland as she reads about Afghanistan.
October marked the longest war the nation has fought. Less than 1 month after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, President George W. Bush announced the first strikes in Afghanistan. The United States' first goal was to topple the Taliban's political control over Afghanistan. This goal was quickly achieved, but was only the beginning of a long and difficult journey to remove the Taliban's military and reestablish a stable, democratic Afghan state. In June 2010, the war surpassed Vietnam as the longest conflict in U.S. history. During this time, troop levels swelled to nearly 100,000 in 2010 and 2011. This increase in troops amid a resurgence of violence led to the deadliest year in Afghanistan, with 499 U.S. soldiers and 711 coalition forces killed in action. President Barack Obama led a drawdown in 2012, and the number of troops in the country has steadily decreased since then, with more and more operations and control being turned over to the forces of Afghanistan. President Barack Obama officially ended the combat mission in Afghanistan, known as Operation Enduring Freedom, in 2014. However, the U.S. and Afghanistan governments reached an agreement to keep some American troops in the country even after the combat mission had ended. Coalition troops remain in the country as well. Roughly 13,000 are still currently serving in Afghanistan. The total U.S. casualties throughout the fighting in Afghanistan equals 2,372, and many more have been injured in the service to our country. If you have served during the fighting in Afghanistan or Iraq, please stand now so we can honor your service and sacrifice. Thank you. Next, the Buffalo High School Mixed Chorus will be performing Who Are the Brave, followed by American Heroes, a salute to the armed forces. Please stand when your service song is sung to be recognized.
I'd like to. Hello? Yeah. I'd like the following middle school students to come forward. Dakota R. Johnson, Ryan H. Walker, Lauren E. Carter, and Ms. Kimberly Huff, please. And there she comes. This year it was the pleasure of the VFW Post, Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 4080 here in Buffalo, to be a sponsor of a patriotic essay written by middle school students. And the theme of the essay this year was, "What Makes America Great?" Unfortunately, we don't have time to read all these essays at this time, but we do have time to recognize students who have absolutely gone above and beyond and have thought and put a great deal of research into their essays, and one fine educator who has supported them in this endeavor. So at this time, I'd like Representative Crawford once again to assist me in presenting these students a certificate, a medal, a medallion, and a small gift card. Lauren E. Carter, third place. Ryan H. Walker, second place. Dakota R. Johnson, first place. And to the educators who make all of this possible. After I retired from the service for 20 years, and I got to fly the first 10, hoorah, that's great. But my most rewarding career was the second 20 when I was privileged to be a high school teacher. So I understand what it is to be an educator, and we appreciate educators like Ms. Kimberly Huff, who went on and encouraged these students. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Once again, it was VFW Post 4080's privilege to do this, and thank you very much, Ms.
Our next two students have been selected from the Buffalo Prairie Middle School students as this year's Patriots Pen Essay winners. Please welcome Kaylin Carter, followed by Chloe Red, as they read their essays.
What makes America great? President Ronald Reagan once said, "Make America great again." This was his campaign slogan used in 1980. Some may ask, though, what was it that made or makes America great? Our religious freedom, the fact that we won't surrender, and our veterans are a few of the many things that make America great. The first thing that I believe makes America great is our religious freedom. In other countries, people do not have the freedom to practice a religion of their choice. Not everybody has to believe the same thing. Each of us know what our beliefs are, and it is such a privilege to be able to practice those beliefs and religions. The fact that we will not surrender is another great thing about America. Another thing that makes our country great is that we do not surrender. Surrendering is weakness, and America is not weak. As Americans, we stand for what we know is right. We fight and do not back down until we get what we fight for. Having that grit and willpower produces a country that is strong. Last but certainly not least of what makes America great is our veterans, creating our land of heroes. In Ronald Reagan's speech called a Warrior's Pledge that was presented on January 20th, 1981, states, "Those who say that we are in a time where there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look." Gettysburg Battlefield, Fort McHenry Battlefield, and Bunker Hill are all great examples of places that heroes fought for you and me. Heroes that risked their lives fighting for our freedom. Veterans that left their families, not knowing when they would return for our freedom. Heroes that lost their lives fighting for our freedom. In conclusion, what makes America great is our religious freedom, the fact that we will not surrender, and our veterans. Everyone can practice their religion of choice. Thankfully, America is not weak due to our veterans who have risked their lives fighting for you and me. Lastly, but certainly not least, our veterans have made America great.
What makes America great is a question I was asked. I didn't have an immediate answer. My mind automatically went to our president, but it's so much more. Harry S. Truman once said, "America was not built on fear. America was built on courage, imagination, and unbeatable determination to do the job at hand." America is great because of diversity, our flag, and freedom. This is America, a brilliant diversity spread like stars, 1,000 points of light in a broad and peaceful sky. I think America is great because of diversity. America is often described as a melting pot. People from all over the world move to America. They come from places like Asia, India, Russia, or Mexico. The metaphor of the melting pot hopes that everyone can come together and live in peace and harmony. I think America is great because of diversity. Pauline Hanson said, "To survive in peace and harmony, united and strong, we must have one people, one nation, one flag." I think America is great because of our flag. Our flag isn't just a piece of cloth that hangs on a flagpole. Our flag is a symbol of our freedom, of liberty, and the history of America. Our mighty flag flew over Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor during the Battle of Baltimore in 1812, bringing hope to our men at sea. I think America is great because of our flag. Daniel J. Borstein said, "Freedom means the opportunity to be what we never thought we would be." I think America is great because of freedom. We as Americans have the freedom to choose, the freedom of speech. We get to choose what we wear, we get to choose what we eat for breakfast, and we get to choose to come to school. Not every part of the world has the same choices. We shouldn't take them for granted. I think America is great because of freedom. There are so many wonderful things that make America great, but diversity, our flag, and freedom truly make America great. Ronald Reagan said, "We're blessed with the opportunity to stand for something, for liberty, freedom, and fairness. These are things worth fighting for, worth devoting our lives to."
Hi, I'm Student Body President Madison Andrews, and I'm reading the story of the tabs. The 24-note bugle call known as taps is thought to be a revision of the French bugle signal called tap 2 that notified soldiers to cease the evening's activities and return to their garrisons. It was sounded an hour before the final bugle call and to end the day by extinguishing fires and lights. The last 5 measures of tap 2 resembles taps. The revision that gave us present-day taps was made during America's Civil War by Union General Daniel Adams Butterfield. Heading on a brigade camped at Harrison Landing near Richmond, up to the time the U.S. Army infantry ended the day the same way as the French final call. General Butterfield decided the lights out with music was too formal and to signal the day's end. One day in July 1862, he called the tap 2 music and hummed a version of it to an aide who wrote it down in music. Butterfield then asked the brigade bugler, Oliver W. Norton, to play the notes, and after listening, lengthen and shorten them while keeping his original melody. He ordered Norton to play this new call at the end of each day. Therefore, instead of regulation call, the music was heard and appreciated by other brigades, who asked for copies and adapted this bugle call. It was even adopted by Confederate buglers. This music was made the official Army bugle call, and after the war, was not given the name taps until 1874. The first time taps was played at a military funeral may have also been in Virginia soon after Butterfield composed it. Captain John Tybalt, the head of the artillery battery, ordered it to be played at the burial of a cannoneer killed in action. Not wanting to reveal the battery's position in the woods to the enemy nearby, Tybalt substituted taps for traditional 3 rifle volleys fired over the grave. Taps was played at the funeral of Confederate General Stonewall Jackson 10 months after it was composed. Army infantry regulations by 1891 required taps to be played at military funeral ceremonies. Taps is now played by the military at burial and memorial services to accompany the lowering of the flag, and is the signal lights out command at day's end. Please remain quiet as taps is performed by members of the Buffalo High School Band. Thank you, veterans, for joining us today and allowing us to show our support for you and your sacrifice. Everyone, please stand with me as we honor our veterans as they exit.
Students need to stay as we honor our veterans as they walk out, and then we'll dismiss after they leave. again. All right, thank you, students, for your respect and kindness this morning, for being honoring and respectful for our veterans. Junior high and middle school, we're going to start with 5th grade. You're going to go down to this end by Mr. Shockley, and you're going to start loading. So 5th grade, start heading out. High school students, you're going to go out by Miss Smith down here, by Carmen Smith, and you're going to go back to 3rd hour.